and welcome back to the Beyond Broadcast podcast, a show which takes a behind-the-scenes look at industry professionals and their lives working in the broadcasting and entertainment industry. Today, I'm speaking with Jane Yee, a voice and face that shaped New Zealand media for more than 2 decades. She started out in the late 90s with the chaos of Channel Z, then moved into the golden era of music television with M2, Squeeze and C4, and went on to champion local artists both on-screen and behind the scenes. Jane later shifted into publicity at Universal Music, became a mum, and then helped kickstart the spin-off's entire podcast network, becoming the site's proudly obsessed blockaholic in the process. Now she's head of podcasts at the New Zealand Herald, driving some of the country's biggest audio projects, including their most recent production, Fall of House Duval. Also, her proudest boast being a core feature part in the cinematic masterpiece, which is Day Harmo's We Gone Ride. Welcome to the show, Jane.
Wow, that is an amazing wrap up of my CV. Thank you very much, Jamie. I'm so happy to be here. Kia ora.
No, it's fantastic to have you, mate. And the journey is wild, weird. I feel like it goes in so many completely different directions. It's something that we discussed off air, the fact that it almost feels like it can't be contained in an hour and a half, but I'm definitely going to try my best. But we'll start from the early years, the early days. We'll skip through the teen years, which usually I love doing for the most part, but I think we want to fast forward as quickly as possible because we want to go back to the days where you majored in radio and in this area you got a communications degree at AUT. Now, the question that usually persists with a lot of the people I speak to is there was like this early passion from their teenage years into getting into their sort of media field. What drew you to radio initially, and what was it that made you be like, okay, I'm going to go throw a comms degree, go to AUT, and this is going to be my thing?
I think a lot of it has to do with being the youngest of 5 girls. So it does go back to childhood and wanting to have my voice heard and really having to, because I was also the smallest, like just perpetually still am, like the shortest of all of us. My nickname from my dad was Runt. So I was the runt of the litter, and my only kind of way of getting attention was using my voice. And so I think that's where that kind of little bit of show ponyship came from. But ultimately, it was my love of music, of communicating with people. I actually put down for my majors both radio and TV, and I didn't get into the TV unit. I got into the radio unit. But honestly, there's something about the audio medium where you don't have to worry what you look like, though that is changing very much these days. But back then it was purely just audio. And we were one of the first years in that degree to use to go digital. So I think even the year prior to us, they were still cutting on reel to reel. So that shows my age. It was a very, very long time ago. And we all had to share one very slow computer to do all our projects on. So that gives you an idea of what we were working with in the area of radio, the era of radio that I was in. But really, yeah, I don't know. I just love the kind of, you can be creative. You don't always, it doesn't have to be about how the scene is set. It's that, as they drilled into our heads, the theatre of the mind kind of approach. And I just loved it.
Was there ever an element or an attempt to use the old cut machines? Weirdly, I did manage to get to experience that myself. Was that still sitting in the background gathering dust, or was that something that you guys...
The cart machines, were you, the little cartridges?
Yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. So even when I started at Channel Z, we had the... most of it was automated, but if we ever wanted to play something that hadn't been loaded into the system, we had to use the carts.
I love that because I think that was the one thing that I can still vividly remember from when I started in radio, which I was 15 years old when I started in radio, and they were still using cart machines at the community music radio station that I was helping out at. So moving over to digital when I was at uni was like the biggest, okay, this is I'm a little bit over my head here, but we can give it an attempt. And one thing I kind of want to touch on is you said that you were one of 5 sisters. Now, do you believe that you're a little bit of an extrovert and introvert at the same time? Because this is the commonality I see with a lot of radio people is like they're big behind the mic, but maybe a little bit shy in person. Do you feel like that runs true to yourself as well?
It definitely depends what day you get me. I love chatting with people. I love learning about people and that sort of thing. But I'm also I'm not the kind of person who goes out a lot. And certainly back in the day, I went out a lot more than I do now. But I'm a bit of a homebody, very, very boring. And there probably is an element of the camera or the mic goes on and I'm just like an amplified version of myself. But I like to think that for the most part, what you've ever seen or heard of me is pretty much it's the real me, you know?
And you mentioned Channel Z, which I feel like we have to touch on at some point for one of two reasons. One being that one of my previous guests was David Riddler, who I imagine you
Oh,
probably got
yes.
to work with at some point. He
He
spoke
was my
very
boss.
fond. Well, there we go. And he spoke very fondly of the station and how wild it was back in the day. And the thing is, I want to understand, in your own words, what do you feel was like the energy at Channel Z when you joined? And also, did you have any idea that it was going to be so influential and like shaping a lot of people's careers? Because I feel like it was the jumping off point for so many people.
I wasn't like I wasn't ever a full timer. I did produce breakfast for a while someone else had glandular fever, so that was a fairly chunky stint. And I actually did my internship at Channel Z. Prior to that, I was doing some work for a little, very really remembered station called 96.1, which was out of the radio network, which was kind of like an alternative station with a tiny little studio that people used to smoke in, um, right next to the old ZM studio. So I had a little experience, but then I went through to Channel Z, and that was honestly so fun. Like, it was a very exciting time. It felt like a moment we were still very much in the monoculture. It was an alternative commercial station, so it kind of had all the resourcing of, at the time I think it was like Can West. I don't even know if it was MediaWorks yet. And then, so it was in the same building as More FM and so on. But it wasn't, so it sat somewhere between, the commercial stations and and student radio. And it just captured an audience that were very passionate, and it was just colourful and bright and fun and a little bit chaotic. And one of my fondest memories is producing John and Nathan's breakfast show. It was the Dick 84 breakfast show. I can't even remember where that reference came from. I think it was the phone number spelt out. You know how you could spell out stuff on phones back in the day. I think it spelled Dick 84. So they were the Dick 84 breakfast show, and those two are so talented. Like, the way that they could read each other and bounce off each other, I just looked at them as inspiration for the kind of magic in a bottle hosting that you can't make happen. It just either is there or it's not. So just this incredible rapport. They'd finish each other's sentences. They could tell if one could tell if the other was setting up a gag, and they could immediately go along with it without having to be preempted. So it was just, that was really cool. And then I was able to do some on-air work as well. I had my own show on a Sunday, which was playing new music, and it was it was a good kind of low pressure entry into radio. And moreover, like, I managed to do that thing that we were always told at university was unlikely to happen, which is like go out of university and get straight on air.
What do you remember about that first on-air shift? Because for a lot of people, it can be the most daunting thing. And on top of that, one other question that is a bit of a follow-up is you talk about the fact that you did a lot of your own selections of music on your show. Did you have a lot of those typical like black shirt, band t-shirt mentors who were kind of recommending music for you? And was that kind of also a time where you had your taste changed a lot in that time?
Yeah, okay. So, funnily enough, everything comes full circle, right? So someone who was incredibly influential on my music taste is a man called Duncan Grieve, who is the founder of the spin-off. So Duncan and I go way back. We were friends at university, and he was really into Britpop. And he just got me, like, I had already been exposed through a friend from work, because I'd taken a year off school between school and university, and I worked in retail, and a friend there had gotten me into Blur and Pulp and so on. And then Duncan sort of expanded on that into all these other Britpop bands. And so I was very heavily influenced by Duncan and Britpop in general. So I absolutely would have snuck in as many Britpop songs as possible on Channel Z. And aside from that, it was just like, it was such a fun time of music discovery, because you had Real Groovy. So I'm Auckland based. There was the iconic Real Groovy shop on Upper Queen Street, where I just go for hours. And like, these are the days when CDs are $29.95. on sale, retail price of like $34. And then I'd buy things based on one track or one person's recommendation, or even if I liked the cover art, and then I just pour over the liner notes. And you really valued every CD that you had because you paid such a premium for it and you owned it. This was, I remember when Spotify started and I was just like, but you don't own the music, so I still have just like boxes and boxes and boxes of CDs.
I actually wanted to do a follow-up on that as well, because Real Groovy is kind of like, I feel like it's the mecca of music in Auckland, and every time I visited, I felt like I ran into some sort of important artist to the New Zealand music scene. Did you ever have the opportunity to run into someone like Chris Knox within Real Groovy? Because I feel like I had the awkward moment of picking up, I think it was a Toy Love record, and Chris Knox was right opposite to me while I was picking it up, and I think I almost cried from embarrassment.
Isn't he just the best? I think he's got a new book coming out, actually. Look, you're asking me to remember back quite away, and I can't remember. I mean, I spent so much time in Real Groovy. That was where, you arranged to meet friends, artists did signings and that kind of thing. I did, in my TV years, I did plenty of interviews in Real Groovy with that as the backdrop. I can't remember specifically kind of like browsing and seeing anyone, but that's not to say it didn't happen.
No, fair
I just
enough,
can't
Jane.
remember.
Yeah, no, that's totally cool.
Too old.
Yeah, nah, I get it. We're all getting old, Jane. And going back to the original question, which, because this is my problem, I always like to ask 3 questions at once. What was that first on-air shift like for you? Because
I don't remember it. Jamie, I don't remember
Really?
it at all. No, because I think it's because I'd already done 96.1 and done the breakfast show with John and Nathan and read the news and stuff. Like it probably wasn't as daunting. I definitely remember my first live TV experience, but radio was, I had a very kind of like, it wasn't a baptism by fire approach. It was very softly, little by little. So I was able to kind of build myself up to that point where I was on mic. But again, it being Channel Z and it being a Sunday afternoon where probably the listenership wasn't like the strongest, the stakes felt a lot lower. So I was really lucky in that way that I wasn't under huge amounts of pressure.
in a sense, was it like it felt comfortable enough that it gave you the confidence to then go into television at that point? Do you feel like it was kind of like the basis of you feeling the confidence to make that shift?
No, not at all. The move to television wasn't planned. I was dating someone at the time who was also in radio, and we were working together on actually a New Zealand on-air produced show. And he decided to audition for M2, and he was like, "You should audition as well." And so I did, and we both got roles. So that was pretty exciting. And to that point, I'd had no experience in front of the camera at all. So that blew my mind.
What for you terrified you about the kind of like difference between TV and radio? Was there anything that you felt really put you on edge in terms of being in front of the camera, or was it just the idea of people being able to look at you compared to being able to hide behind the mic?
It's definitely the visual element. You're suddenly worrying about your hair, how you're sitting, is your makeup right, and all that kind of thing. But I think the main thing actually is you don't have the same level of control. There's people in a control room who are telling you, they're talking in your ear. You're having to throw to things. You don't control when they start rolling in the same way. It's not like you can kind of just fluff a voice break and quickly press a button to get out of it. So yeah, there's so many more things to think about. And I think in some ways, at least at the very beginning, you feel a little bit more restricted in what you can do. Whereas on radio, I was getting to the point where I was far more relaxed and able to kind of own my show. Whereas when I started on TV, it felt like I was part of a much bigger thing. Because there are some, you're in a radio studio, it's you and a mic, and a control board. And that's it. And you'll have a very direct relationship with your listeners who might be texting in or calling in. and you feel like you're talking very one-on-one with them, but then you go into a TV environment and there's lights and there's camera people and there's people in a control room, and it's an entirely different thing. That said, M2, my first TV, was in the middle of the night, literally. So again, the stakes were low as far as starting out in TV. I don't know how many viewers we had on that first night, probably not that many. And we launched like September 11, 2001. So it was, it was
Great timing. Impeccable time. Jeez. That was a hell of a way to come into the first show. And actually, in that regard, it was quite a renegade-ish sort of time slot as well. Yeah, midnight till what? It was 6 a.m., wasn't it, that you guys ran till?
It was 11 p.m. till 6 a.m., yeah.
And that was 3 nights a week that you were having to be on the ball. And a question that I've always been quite curious about, and I think it's kind of interesting because I feel like it's a bit of a rule that's kind of existed in radio as well, is that you guys, the show had this self-imposed sort of New Zealand music quota that you tried to hit of like 33%.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that I can imagine is because you guys were probably responsible for weirdly breaking probably a lot of artists at 1 o'clock in the morning, did you ever have artists personally reach out to you and being like, thank you for featuring my music video at 3:34 a.m. in the morning?
Absolutely. It was look, don't underestimate the ability of young people to stay up all night. Like, they still do it now. They're just gaming. We were so thirsty at that time for local music content that to have something that ran like our own mini version of MTV, I guess, was super, super exciting for a young audience. And they were really engaged. And I think considering the god-awful hours it was on air, it did really, really well. We had a very active chat room, forums and that kind of thing. We'd go to Big Day Out and just be swamped by kids wanting M2 merch. And it was so fun. Like, it was just, when I think back and think how kind of like, I love my job, but it's a job. Back then, your job was like, I would do this for free, and you practically did because the pay was rubbish, but it was just so much fun. The entire crew, everyone was super young, and all the other hosts were great. We just had like an absolute blast.
And how did you handle the late shift? Because I can imagine there would have been a lot of sleepless nights and it would have been a lot of suffering during the week. Was it something you ever managed to get used to?
I was lucky because I only ever did the 11 till 1 in the morning, so it wasn't too bad. We had like Nick Dwyer and P Money coming in to do like their 4 a.m. shows, which I'm very glad I didn't have to do. So no, I got off incredibly lightly, and I also, let's not forget, I was like, what, I don't know, 22 or something. Like, I could stay up. I had the ability to do that. I can't do that these days, but back then that was completely fine. Sometimes I'd stick around. Like, we would, sometimes at the hosts of the early show, which was called Volume, would stick around till the end, and we'd all go and get McDonald's breakfast at 6 a.m. with the whole crew.
Legendary. And I think the thing that I've always found interesting is even the fact that TV2 took the risk on that show. It's odd. It reminds me of the days when, I guess New Zealand television was a little bit riskier with things like Back of the Wire. It seems like there was a little bit more rebelliousness in terms of putting interesting and New Zealand-based content on. But one thing I'm really interested to touch on is you're working on shows like Squeeze, which was alongside Juice and J2. You were competing with some pretty well-established channels that were specifically for music. Do you think formats like that could exist now on YouTube? No. Or do you think it's kind of like a dying breed and it could never exist ever again?
No. I think the international, it's sad to say, but international culture has permeated way too much. You're thinking back at a time where we had, as you say, we had Juice, J2, we had our own local version of MTV, we had Alt TV, we had C4 all running at the same time. It's like 4 or 5 different music offerings. Actual music stations playing clips. Then YouTube came along and just completely fucked all that. Can I say that? Sorry.
Of course you can say that. If anything, I was more worried about you saying it for the sake of the company. I'm always company-centric, Jane.
No, it's so, look, podcasting is the last great Wild West, isn't it?
Exactly.
No, YouTube really kind of screwed that up for all of us. There probably, it did get to a point where audiences were getting pretty fragmented across these different platforms, but they all enjoyed success. So it was an amazing time for New Zealand music, as you spoke to before, because they, artists could get exposure. There were voluntary quotas. There were, and then there were kind of mandated quotas as well that came in from New Zealand On Air. And it was all just, there was just a lot of pride in New Zealand music. There was an amazing New Zealand music scene. And I'm not sure that, I can't say that doesn't exist anymore. I'm just not really as aware of it because I'm just not of the generation. I'm not sure if there's a really a groundswell of New Zealand music scene happening online. I have no doubt that there is something, but it doesn't feel like it's kind of cutting through the mainstream in the way that it did when I was working in radio and music TV.
I think you
and
touched
one thing,
on something.
One thing
Yeah,
I
go
just
for it.
want to say, if you don't mind, going back to how you said TV2 took a risk to put M2 on, I think they did, but at the same time, it was New Zealand On Air funded, so that also took some money to put that on in the middle of the night. Do with that
That
what
is-
you will. This is the kind of
That's
stuff
very
I've
true.
realized now that I've been in the industry long enough. I kind of go, oh, I see.
Yeah, no one would have done that commercial. It was not commercially viable at all. It was literally like, how can we kind of fit the New Zealand music quota? Oh, bugger it. We'll put a bunch of music on at 6 a.m. and we'll see what happens. Yeah. If anything, a smart move, I guess. Well, no, it was. But the thing I'm also curious about is this whole idea, which I've been interested in touching on this for a couple of people, and that is the whole idea of there's international culture now. There is no set culture of New Zealand. It's almost like the idea of like people talk about the fact nostalgia doesn't exist anymore and won't exist for people because there's no collective culture anymore. Like the fact of when people talk about things like, oh, I remember like going back to even your appearance, Day Harmo. Everyone in New Zealand can remember when Day Harmo's music video came out and when the single came out because everyone was talking about, even if they weren't into hip hop, it was a collective thing that everyone had heard and listened to. Now that's not really a thing. I don't know. Would you agree with that or disagree?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it does exist, but it's different, right? So, it's much more. There are no borders in terms of these things happening. So I guess if Taylor Swift was doing an Eras tour, that's a huge thing. It would be very difficult for a local artist to replicate something like that to that level and reach all New Zealanders the way that Taylor Swift can. But Day Harmo did, you're right. And that was the most expensive music video made in New Zealand at that date. I'd hazard there aren't a whole lot that have been more expensive than that one since even. It was a time when New Zealand music could make money, when New Zealand artists did better than international artists. They sat at the top of the charts. You think of Scribe, sitting at the top of the charts for so long, and people were buying physical CDs, so there was money in local artists. And obviously we have Lorde, but yes, while Lorde is a big artist, the money that she's making is really international money. Back in my day, a New Zealand artist could do very, very well on the local audience. They didn't have to cut through to overseas. Like, that would be nice, but, they could actually just do well locally. And so it meant you had these local shows that were available to you. I remember 8 Foot Sativa would do like 28-day tours, and then they'd have a wee break, and then they'd go and do it all over again, like 28 venues all over New Zealand. Like, I cannot imagine that happening anymore. But the Day Harmo video, they closed off streets in downtown, which, again, not an easy thing to do.
Yeah,
and there was also this whole kind of range of superstar music video directors. So Chris Graham was right up there. He did amazing work for Scribe, and he did the Day Harmo video. You had people like Joe Loney and Greg Page. Like, could you name a New Zealand music video director these days? Like, it's just it's a completely different time. And yeah, that was my cameo in that, which haunts me to this day.
How do you
was
say
purely
that?
because
I am envious of you.
was purely because we wanted to shoot a behind the scenes for Squeeze, which was, you mentioned, New Zealand music TV show. And Chris Graham got a bit cheeky on it. He was like, we'll only let you on set if you do a cameo. And so that's how that happened. I didn't audition for it or put my hand up for it. I had to do it.
Bugger off, Jane. We all know you were applying for it. Like, let's be real here. We can say it on air, but it's fine. We know the truth. But it's one of the things that I would love to kind of talk about as well is the fact that you basically became one of the main faces of C4, and C4 at the time was massive. Like, I think it was inescapable for anyone that was younger or under the age of, like, I guess 30 at that point. And one of the things I love, apart from the fact that you were hanging around with Clark Gayford among other people, was I can just imagine what the dynamic was like behind the scenes, because I feel like it always seemed like the hipster cousin of TV3. You guys always seemed a bit more rebellious. You had guys like Di Henwood running around the halls. For you, what was your experience walking through the offices of C4 on a normal day?
It was exactly like that. When you say running around the halls, it was kind of like that. We were like the little kids who were causing trouble on the lower floor. C4 was such again, an incredible time. I felt very fortunate. Like, it was just stars aligning kind of stuff. Squeeze had not been renewed for funding after 3 years. So I'd done 3 years of Squeeze. I'd taken on another job within Satellite Pictures, which was, the company that produced Squeeze. But then I get this like mysterious call from Andrew Schusterman saying, would you meet me and producer Leander Borrett? We'll come and pick you up on College Hill. And they kind of picked me up and took me to Vulcan Lane for a coffee. And they're like, Jackie Brown's leaving. We want you to test for the role. And I was like, okay, of course I will. And so I had to go in and do a screen test with Clark, which obviously went well. Within, I left, they were like, okay, we've got a few other people to test and we'll give you a call. But within about like a minute, Shust had called me to say, you've got it. So I couldn't believe, like, I can remember I was sitting at the lights in Kingsland going, how is this my life? I've just landed, like, I thought that was it. And I've just landed this, like, the dream TV gig. And I started on Valentine's Day, the same day that Joel DeFries started with C4. So, it was a bunch of amazing characters, really talented presenters, just, and lots of fun. And all the production crew behind the scenes were amazing too. Everyone was just so passionate about music. It was a great thing. Like, the Sting kind of music lives here, the tagline. That felt true, It felt like we were like this little hub of music.
I don't want to use the word, but it's like the whole term, like, people like, you can be a poser music fan on a radio station, but you guys seem like you actually gave a shit about what was going on here. And one thing I'd love to touch on, because I feel like I've heard a couple of whispers about this, is what goes on behind the closed doors of a negotiation table with Andrew Schusterman? Like, how does that work? Is there like a good cop, bad cop scenario? How does a closed door like meeting with that kind of team go down? And you mentioned the fact that it was like a phone call, like being like, come to the office now. Was it kind of like, did you feel like it was a little bit more secretive than it needed to be? Or was it kind of like there was a bit of like seriousness to the whole negotiation?
Oh, no, I think that was purely because, I didn't want my employers to see that I was kind of, if they saw me having a meeting with Shust, then they'd be like, what's going on? But also the news about Jackie leaving hadn't broken either. So I guess they were just trying to keep that all on the down low. So there was nothing nefarious about it. I mean, it was quite a fun story to tell, but actually it was just rooted in practicalities.
And does it make you laugh in a way? Because this is another thing I touched on with someone else, is the fact that in New Zealand, presenters, radio presenters, television presenters are our equivalent of celebrities. While other people may have the big-time actors and Hollywood actors, you guys, such as yourself, Jane, are the famous people that we follow. Is it kind of weird to think about that you did have to take the precautions to make sure someone didn't see you entering the office in case it became front-page news the next day?
Okay, well, it was probably OTT, because I just can't imagine that it was quite there. I mean, I just very much struggle to get my head around the idea that I was any sort of a celebrity. I mean, you had your proper John Campbells and Alison Moores and Simon. They were the celebrities. We were just like the music TV kids. So I don't think that we felt like proper celebrities, as you say. We certainly were kind of known in music circles and amongst young people, but I have never sort of considered myself a celebrity, and I have never I've never kind of I hate that kind of hierarchy idea that like one person has more to offer than someone else. I just got very, very lucky, and I was very conscious of the fact that there were thousands of people who could have done my job just as well. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, knew the right people, all of those things, and just got lucky. Like, there's so many things that if that thing didn't happen, then all the other things wouldn't have happened. The only reason I got into Channel Z in the first place was because one of the women I'd worked with at 96.1 was doing, she worked for Channel Z, and my internship was actually with More FM. And she came downstairs and was like, no, come upstairs and work with us. And she took me up to Channel Z. Now, had that not happened, who knows? Like I might be just writing ads for More FM today. I don't know. Not that More FM exists anymore, does it?
Yeah, it still exists. Yes.
Oh, God, sorry, More FM. They all change names so much. Whenever I say classic hits, everyone's like, no, it's the hits. Or I say
to be fair,
no, it's the B.
The rebranding of everything is too much. We just need to stick to the branding. Everyone knows it. Let's keep it. Like, why do we need to change it? Yeah, come on, guys.
It's real boomer energy to say that, isn't it? Just stick to what it used to be, please.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't handle change.
I do feel like that. I feel like that completely, to be fair. And was it ever crossing your mind at any point that you're like, should I take the risk on going to Channel Z instead of doing the More FM internship? Was that something that crossed your mind?
No,
were you like, no
at
way.
All.
Like,
No, at that point we were just like, I was so young and like literally still at university. You just took whatever opportunity came your way. And no, I wasn't thinking career progression or anything at that point. I was just like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. That sounds good. They play good music.
But that's literally what got you to where you are, Jane, was the fact of like, this sounds cool. This is something I want to do because it actually sounds cool, rather than trying to go for the corporate way of like, let's climb the ladder, which I kind of love, because I feel like you say it's kind of serendipitous, but I think it's you kind of just stayed true to what you actually wanted to do, not just always hunting for maybe the money job or the job that seemed like it would be cushy. Like, that's obviously how you got to where you are.
I did, I really do believe in doing jobs you love, because if you work so many hours a week, you want to be able to get some fulfillment out of it. It's definitely a misconception that being on TV necessarily pays tons of money. Well, certainly not music TV. There would have been other routes to go if I had wanted to be well off. Podcasting, music, music, TV, radio were not the ones. They were not the routes to get rich. Well, not for me anyway.
But I think the thing I love, Jane, is the fact that like you talk about it as if you just did presenting, which is not the case, especially in that era, because you had homegrown and special features, which I vividly remember, and wherein you weren't just presenting, you were doing the narration, you were doing the interviews, you were directing, you were doing research, you had tight budgets to deal with, notoriously tight, which I think everyone knew at the time but probably didn't acknowledge. How the hell did you handle producing something that was actually incredibly good for such a small budget? Like homegrown especially.
Well, okay, so I didn't produce. I directed a series that was called Homegrown Profiles, and researched and presented and directed that. But aside from that, all we had in-house producers at C4 who looked after special features and all that. So I can't claim any of that. All the hosts did their own research. We did our own writing. We came up with the creative ideas for any kind of like little colour bits that were in between, little skits and things. But no, I have to make sure that the actual producers get their credit. So I was not involved in any money conversations or budgets or anything like that, though I do understand they were tight. So no, there wasn't that level, it wasn't probably that. I wasn't as good as you say I am. I was mostly just a hairdo on the telly,
Wait, so the story of you watching at 2 a.m. a videotape of an interview with, I believe, Shay Fu, where you were having to try and figure out what the best parts were, was not true. Is that true? No, the fact that you were coming late?
I don't know where you saw that
interview,
interview, but no, that's part of Homegrown Profiles. So that is that I did direct that series. Yeah. But it was through, I didn't have to look after the budget for it. It was an in-house production for C4, so I to just make sure we booked the crew, and then yes, I did do all the rough edit and everything. And so that bit was true. I would have been watching. I actually remember. I don't remember the interview where I said that, but I do remember sitting up all night dealing with that and going, "Oh God, this is bloody hard." Doing these other bits of the TV job, quite hard.
Did it kind of humble you in a way, in the sense of kind of like getting a better understanding of the overall thing? Because you kept on saying you're just a hairdo, which is, I think it exceeds further than that. But did it give you a better overall understanding of like the process of creating story?
Yeah, I've always been really into kind of the tech side of things as well. So in university, we learned how to edit and all of that kind of thing. We made our own audio documentaries, and then I sort of self-taught audio editing, on a very basic level, and some TV editing, video editing. So I am quite a hands-on person. I also think it sets you up really well to understand the full process and other people's roles and how important everyone is in the chain of a production, right from the concept through to delivery. And I think that's been a really useful tool right through to kind of the podcasting phase, because when I started in podcasting, it was like you're a one-man show a lot of the time. So having a good understanding of all the working parts is a necessity. And if you don't understand it, you have to learn it. But ultimately, it's really been helpful for my experience as a manager of other people as well, because I feel like I do have a good understanding of people's roles, and I never take the work that they do for granted, and I understand why something takes as long as it does. I also means that sometimes I know something doesn't need to take as long as someone it's taking to do it, and they can't pull the wool. But I haven't experienced that as often as understanding that people, giving people the space and time to do what they need to do, because it does take time.
And Jen, I want to fast forward a little bit, because it's the thing I talk about is you make pivots and changes constantly, and it's incredible how you've managed to move through your career into so many different areas, and it seems effortless because you shifted into Universal Music. Now, what made you move away from on-air to go into publicity? Because it doesn't seem like such a crazy pivot, but in a way it is. So what made you decide to move off air?
It was, I am a person who makes extremely impulsive decisions, like big decisions sometimes, and resigning from C4 was one of those. It seemed like a crazy thing. So I think I just had this realization, like I've been here for 3 years, and at the time I was like late 20s, and I'm like, I'm not youth anymore. Oh, how I laugh now. So I felt like my days were numbered. No one had given me any reason to think that. And I think there was a point where like I didn't get a pay rise, and I kind of played chicken. I was like, if I don't get this pay rise, I'm gonna resign. I had also, to give some more context, had an extremely bad mental health period. So there was a lot of overwhelm going on, and really, I think there was a pay freeze, and I just kind of went, you know what, like now's the time to dip out. I probably can't be considered youth to be hosting youth TV for too much longer. I'm not making as much money as I kind of need to be in the next steps of life, and if I don't jump, probably at some point my contract's just not going to be renewed. So I just resigned, and then was just going to have some time to kind of get my head together. When I got a call from Universal, because one of my good friends worked there, they said there was a role coming up. And I was like, that sounds good. That sounds good. Maybe I'll do that. And then so that's what I did. I went into publicity at Universal Music. And again, what an amazing job. Like I've just been so lucky.
It's just like jumping from cool job to cool job. And I want to touch on something, because it's something I spoke about with another guest of mine, which is the whole idea of media can be quite mentally breaking in many ways. Mm-hmm. Not just the low pay, but also the stressful nature of being a creative in a sense, as well as also a lot of the times we do have to take on a lot of projects, and sometimes we take on too many projects to kind of get the passion or get the creativity going. Was that kind of a little bit of the element of what happened to you? Was it too many projects at one time, or was it a mixture of everything?
I'll be honest, I think it was mostly that I had a mental breakdown, and that was largely around my own mental health struggles, not to do with work. There was nothing that was happening at C4 that particularly was making my life difficult. I think being in the public eye and having to actually go and put on a brave face and do live television when I felt like I was dying inside, that obviously was an extra pressure that contributed to me making the decision. It was the right decision to make for me at the time, and it wasn't something that was public information at the time, but I've spoken a lot about my mental health struggles in the years since. So, that was a massive contributor. And it was a really refreshing break to go into what was actually a pretty well paid job, with a company car and a car park and my own office, and but still all the joy of being able to work in music and all the excitement of the music industry and just kind of learning some new skills. And one of my major roles was servicing TV. So that was an area, music TV was an area I was very familiar with. So it was quite a nice transition.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was almost like a return to force. And are you liking this kind of renaissance that we're having at the moment in media where people are getting more comfortable about talking about their mental health? I know it's the most common topic among radio and podcasting. And I know I've had some people say, yeah, it's great that we're having this conversation, but maybe we're having it too much. But I think it's probably good that we are talking about it more frequently because it's a reality of the day-to-day. So, like, why not talk about it more frequently?
Yeah, it totally is. I mean, I can also understand that there can be a fatigue, particularly, if, sometimes when you are struggling, it's reassuring to know that you're not alone, but at the same time, you can be like, oh my God, we're all fucked. That doesn't make me feel any better at all. Where is the hope? I mean, obviously, I think talking about these things is better than not. As long as it's genuine and it's authentic conversation, then sure, if it's people's real experience, why would you not talk about it? And if it's had, like in as I've just said, in my career journey, it was a major factor of me getting out of TV when I did. So to say otherwise would be to just be telling lies.
And I like the fact that you talked about Universal kind of making that jump easy. Was it also kind of nice because you still managed to dip your toe back into the space that you were comfortable in and that you loved, and you were basically saying hello to your friends all the time because more likely than not you were having those sorts of same interactions representing the artist? Was it kind of like you had the element of media but without the stress that came associated with it? Was it kind of a little bit of that?
Yeah, I mean, there were all new stresses as there always are,
Of
but
course,
yes,
yeah.
It was. And I tell you what, though, it was strange going back into C4 and servicing C4 with music videos, because it's like visiting your ex-partner and being like, "Hey, got some things to show you. Just returning your CDs." But there have been lots of decisions I've made in my career that I've second guessed, that I've gone, was that the right thing? And in life in general, that is life, right? But it was just a really, again, the music industry, we were selling CDs, we were making money. So it was nice to be in a job that was kind of like a proper job, even though it was like as loose of a proper job as you can imagine. It was still a proper job. And it was, as you say, still in music. So I was still able to work with artists, and just see the different side of the industry, get lots of experience because I did a communications degree. A lot of that is PR and publicity and that kind of thing. So I got to exercise those muscles and build up some communication skills that I kind of was always interested in. No secret that I love to chat, and no secret that I love to just connect with people. So that was a really good way of doing that in a much more one-on-one way rather than through a screen.
And because you were doing representation and publicity, who would you say was the artist that for you now still sticks in your mind as being probably one of the, I'd say, not the most important, but the one that you think defined your career for that period? Because I've met a couple of people that have worked in PR and they've been happy to be the main reason for breaking a certain artist, or perhaps they went the extra mile for the artist because they believed in them in such a way that they're like, maybe these people can't see what I see, but they need to know about it. Was there a particular artist that kind of fitted that category for you?
Well, it was a little bit because I was on the side of things where the artists were kind of, I was told which artists I was promoting, right? And I did do, a lot of work with New Zealand artists and getting them out there. So we did work with Boronga, we did work with Smash Proof, Gin Wigmore, Collapsing Cities. There were lots of different deals. Either they were direct signings or we were just doing distribution for them and looking after their promo. So I don't think I can take credit for being particularly pivotal in any one musician's or one artist's career. That would be extremely overblown, but I worked with a lot and enjoyed it. I think the most significant memory I have of that time is actually just like when Justin Bieber came and did his promo tour here and played this show at the school and just got mobbed at the airport and someone took us out, because that was wild. That was as close to like a full scale mobbing type scenario I've ever been involved in. And we we kind of orchestrated that whole thing. So there were two of us who really kind of handled that whole thing, and it went brilliantly.
Exactly. It's going to probably permanently be part of the like New Zealand cultural zeitgeist. Like maybe we didn't get the Beatlemania that we did in like the early 2000s that guys had Bieber fever, which I think is always going to exist, which is kind of wild to think about now because I don't think there is really any artist that can have that pull potentially in New Zealand, much like maybe back in the day, I guess.
No. It was the funny thing was we were, he had previously, we were a bit naughty because previously he had been in Australia just before us and was supposed to be doing some signings at malls. And I think there were mobs that were, he was doing performances and the mobs of kids, it was creating kind of safety issues. So they shut that down and they were like, don't let anyone know when he arrives in the country, otherwise kids will turn up at the airport. And we were like, okay, we won't let anyone know. And we immediately let some fans know. And so the mob at the airport wasn't supposed to happen, but we really wanted it to happen. So we made it happen. And I don't think I've told anyone that before.
In terms of strategy, how was it that you get in contact with the Justin Bieber fan club back in that day? Was that a group text, much like the old like kind of house party scenario, or was this like a Facebook like message forum? How did you get this marketing chain going, Jane?
Remember when X was Twitter? It was on Twitter. So, we often had a very active kind of social media presence through Universal Music, and we often had fans kind of messaging us, what's happening, when's this coming out today? And you pretty quickly got to know who was kind of leading up the street team of a particular artist. And yeah, you just kind of drop them a, hey, don't tell anyone, and then of course they tell everyone.
That is like one of the backdoor secrets of Universal Music that like you've kind of let loose is the fact that no, these leaks are meant to happen. They're not like always unintentional. You can't divulge.
I can't speak for every time. An artist has had people turn up at the airport or so on, but certainly in that event, I will take accountability that we made that happen.
Fandoms are crazy. It's much like I'm here in Argentina, and Oasis was here about 3 weeks ago for their tour, and within I think 30 seconds of the plane landing, there was over 2,000 people trying to make it to the airport, if not more. And then outside the hotel, they ended up having to shut down the whole block because people were just swarming the hotel. So I know what you mean. Yeah, the fandom.
I love that though.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's cool.
If there was a day when Oasis rolled into town and people didn't do that, that would be a sad day,
I completely agree. I think my partner said to me that I was insane to even think about trying that. But then also at the end of the day, she was like, well, should we do it for the All Blacks when they came here? And I was like, it's the same thing. Come on. It's the same.
Yeah.
And the biggest year, I think, for you and a major shift in terms of it's outside of the career, becoming a mum in 2012, later having twins. A lot of people say that motherhood really changes your identity in many ways. It also changes your viewpoint on things. How do you feel that had a massive change in your approach to work, or did it not? Do you feel like it's just you became a mother and then that was kind of like an added thing to the life?
Oh God, that is a very big question, Jamie. Like, how long do you have? We had our firstborn when I was still at Universal Music, so I went on maternity leave. I came back from maternity leave after a year and was made redundant, which I kind of was okay with because I was like, I can't work full time. I want to be with my kid. He was quite a particular baby, reasons for which we found out later on. But so they offered me a contracting role, which I took on part-time, but I just couldn't make it work with childcare. I just couldn't, and it was too stressful. So in the end, I left Universal and was just like, I'm going to be a mum. At the time as well, my partner was traveling a lot for his work, and his work had really, really taken off. So we could afford for me, we're very, very lucky we could afford for me to stay home. And then I was just kind of doing little bits of freelancing here and there. I was writing columns for stuff and, just various little bits and pieces. I think there's been some little random TV things I've done along the way as well. And then then we got pregnant with twins just after I had accepted a job to work with Scott McLaughlin, who was the guy who discovered Lord, and worked with his management company. That as has been much covered in the press, he's not particularly active anymore. And so it's probably not such a bad thing that I didn't get involved in that company. But it was just, it did just seem like that thing where I was like, okay, I'm pregnant. That's okay. I can probably do some work for this company. That's fine. And then finding out it was twins and just getting in touch and going, I don't think I can do any work for you because I know how hard one kid is. And I've still got that kid. And now there are 2 more on the way. So the twins thing really put a spanner in the works of the old career, but wouldn't change it. They're fantastic, but it was really, really, really full on. And again, this is at a time when Joel, my ex's business, he was just so busy traveling. I was at home with the kids a lot while he was overseas. So there really just wasn't an opportunity that I could see to make work where I could return to work in any kind of meaningful way, just picking up little bits of pieces of writing here and there. And doing, I started to do some kind of like Insta mom stuff back in the very early days of people posting on Instagram. And that was something that in a funny way kept me quite fulfilled because I was still connected. I was talking to people every day and other mums, and that was actually a really nice time.
And I go back to the whole thing that I feel like every choice and decision you make seems to work in your favor, much like what you said, like probably a good thing you didn't get the job with Scott McLaughlin because otherwise it could have been a pretty spicy time to be involved with him.
Yeah, could have been a spicy time.
Yeah. And I think it's almost always worked out for you, Jane, in this like beautiful way. And the cool thing I love is the fact that you deviated into another medium, going into print, which like you're writing columns and things like that. It's like you always manage to somehow pivot into the next area of media, but then make it back to the kind of core thing of like music or something creative or anything else. And that's kind of what brings you then to, as you said, meeting up with your longtime friend Duncan Grieve and joining the spin-off, which is crazy. And I love the fact that you did almost get this time to kind of reevaluate, reassess everything. You had the time with the kids and then you were able to dip your toes back in. But I want to really know about that first early stage meeting. First of all, because like Spin-off was an underdog in New Zealand media. Even when you guys started, I'm imagining it was only a couple of people. From what I've been told, it was a small office with 4 people. I might even be wrong. It might have even been less. How did Duncan set up that first meeting? And second of all, how the hell did he pitch it to you? And you're like, you know what? This sounds great. We're going to do this.
It didn't happen like that at all. So you got some of it right in terms of the spin-off was incredibly small. When it first started, it was actually funded by Lightbox, and they wanted kind of a TV review website. So that's how the spin-off officially started. It's a little tele blog. And Duncan sort of, it's become spin-off lore somewhat. His only employee was Alex Casey, who is the most incredible human being on the planet. And she was basically running, setting the site live from her bedroom while Duncan was getting on a plane to Spain. So very much Alex, it was Duncan's baby, but Alex was at the coalface when it first kicked off. And then, and it was really just a whole bunch of kind of contracted or freelance writers who were contributing. And it grew, and I think, again, it was very much, I think if Duncan said it himself, if he knew how hard it was and how audacious they were actually being when they were trying to get like money for sponsorships and things, he probably would never have done it. But it's that naivety that he had that enabled them to do so. And I at the time was obsessed with The Bachelor US. I'd spent a lot of time at home with children and watching reality television. And I was obsessed with The Bachelor US, and from that I'd become obsessed with a podcast called Bachelor Party, which was a Grant, at the time it was Grantland podcast. That's all kind of morphed into what is now the Ringer Network, podcast network. So Juliet Littman and David Jacoby, who is a sports podcaster mostly, they would get together and recap The Bachelor, and it was so entertaining. It was just like smart people talking about dumb stuff, and I got in touch with Duncan because he'd been sort of teaming up to do some writing for the spin-off, and I was like, what about we do a podcast recapping The Bachelor NZ? It's just been announced, it was I think March 2015 or something, and he was like, okay. He said, I think you'd be really great to do that with this young talent I've got, Alex. So I met Alex the day that she arrived. I was like breastfeeding twins when she walked in, And she came to my house with Duncan because he came to kind of introduce us. And we all sat behind the mic and we did a pilot episode of what would eventually become the Real Pod. And it just, like, it was terrible, don't get me wrong, but the three of us kind of just clicked behind the mic. And I think, I find it now, again, really just super lucky because the number of times I've tried to get hosts to work together and you're just like, the magic is just not there. But we just kind of started it and kept going and continued with it and grew this amazing fan base. Like, it was a small fan base, but a really incredibly loyal one. And that podcast ended up going for like 8-9 years. And so that was my first work for the spin-off. So that was dated back right to 2015. Then I wrote a bunch of sort of columns for them, as you mentioned, Blockaholic. I was recapping the block for them. Eventually moved to the US for my partner's work. Actually, he was my husband at the time. We got married just before we went over there. And continued doing the Real Pod. Really just kind of looked at what the media was doing in the States. And when we came home with COVID, we didn't have COVID. We came home with COVID because of COVID, I should say. We came home because of COVID. I just, it was like 2 days arriving at home. I rang up. Duncan was like, you guys have kind of like started this podcasting thing. And for the size of company that you are, which is very small, you're doing pretty well. You've got a couple of podcasts going that are doing quite well. And, I think if you don't jump on this now, you will get left behind by the bigger players. And he was like, okay, sounds good. Do you want to come do that? So that's how it happened. And once we sort of got out of our isolation and, the first lockdown was over and that sort of thing, I just started working at the spin-off and it was kind of like, okay, here's your desk. And I was like, okay, what's my job? And they were like, you do podcasts. I was like, okay. Okay, I guess that's just what I do now. And so it was very much kind of making it up as I went along, but which everyone in podcasting, not just in New Zealand, but around the world was doing at that time. So this was 2019. Doesn't seem like that long ago, but it was, the podcasting still is a little bit the Wild West. It was extremely the Wild West back then.
That's the funniest thing because you kind of birthed a lot of the earlier kind of iterations of corporate podcasts or enterprise podcasts in New Zealand, which I worked for a podcasting company before that. That was literally their speciality. They were in the UK. That's been around for years. But in New Zealand, it was still kind of in its infancy. And it was interesting to see that you guys were aligning with like brands like KiwiBank and stuff to produce these set podcasts, which obviously the intention was to promote KiwiBank and what they do and get customers, but you already had the intention of the content needs to be interesting in order for people to relate to the brand. How was it kind of in those early days trying to convince brands or sponsors, like, trust me guys, this is a real thing. Yeah, we're not talking about your bank for an hour and a half, but like, I can assure you that this content is going to relate to your customers and they're going to be like, you know what, we're going to work with these guys because of it. How did you pitch that?
We got so lucky with KiwiBank. They really, and especially as far as a bank goes, because I have worked with banks since, and banks are notoriously, very regulated in how and want and need to retain a lot of control for anything that has their name attached to it. So KiwiBank were real renegades in that sense when they came on board with our economics podcast, which was When the Facts Change. So we had Bernard Hickey, who was this, he's just a bit of a legend. He's, I don't think he'd be sad to hear me say this. I think he would understand when I say his brain's a little bit like scrambled eggs. He is, what makes him genius also makes him hard to contain. He has all these incredible thoughts going on. He has this amazing ability to just sit behind the mic and riff and do like a 10-minute intro that's just a monologue that he has got no notes for. It all just comes out of his head. And he can kind of break things down in a way, really complex economic information, and break it down for the audience in a way that is relatable but not condescending for even people who are into economics. It doesn't feel like they're being spoon-fed. So I think he's actually got a really magical skill there. And I think this is the theme you're probably hearing me say again and again. There's just this innate talent that people have. And one of my biggest bugbears about podcasting is just assuming any broadcaster, any TV host, any radio host can get behind a podcast mic and just make the magic happen. They are all very good at what they do. They are also different different formats as far as I'm concerned. And not to say that there isn't crossover and some can't, but it doesn't mean it's not an automatic thing that someone can be good as a TV host and then get behind a microphone, a podcast microphone, and be able to kind of produce that kind of intimate podcasting magic, which is a lot more off the cuff. Anyway, so how did we get Kiwi? Well, yeah, Kiwi Bank took the risk. I don't know how. Honestly, don't know how. I mean, again, Duncan is like an incredible salesperson. He really can get people on board the dream and the vision. What we were very, very particular about was that they wouldn't have editorial control. That's really difficult. And again, even now, I've worked with so many brands since, and we've done a lot of white label content through the spin-off. That's stuff that people wouldn't even know about because it never went out on our network, almost like a production house, probably similar to the kind of work you were doing in the UK. Where people were putting it out on their own channels. You know, we worked with Deloitte, with the Auckland City Council, New Zealand Police, like a whole bunch of different organisations. And you wouldn't even know it was a spin-off made production, because essentially it was more like a spin-off studio production rather than, we weren't necessarily having masses of influence on the editorial side. The reason why we had to make sure that editorial content was sound for anything on our platform was because it had our brand on it. We had very, very loyal readers who had kind of set expectations from the spin-off, and we wanted to service them. So anything that ever went out on the Spin-Off Podcast Network, if it had a client attached to it, had a dual purpose here, right? It had to have a commercial rationale for the client, and it had to have an audience rationale for us. So we had to strike that balance, and that was a real skill. And, sometimes it was easier than it was other times. But to me, When the Facts Change was a real success in that way, because it did garner a really excellent audience. It did really well, I think, for Kiwi Bank. They were really happy for it. Went for years and years. And they still got... the marriage worked really well. They had one of their economists would come in once a month to appear on the show. Well, the economists are experts in the economic climate, so it made sense for the audience. And those shows always did just as well, if not better, than the regular episodes. And the integration was very, very seamless. And we also, they never got episodes before they went to air. Like they didn't have any editorial control, and so that was a really privileged position to be in when you're working with a brand, as I'm sure you can appreciate, Jamie. Doesn't happen often.
Yeah, it doesn't really. And I think that's what I love about hearing is the fact that the spin-off kind of had the trust from one, not only from the standpoint of you guys trusted yourselves and what your brand is, and knowing that you're not just going to accept a podcast for the sake of getting the money or the sponsorship. You're willing to obviously white label and be like, this is part of the studio stuff, this is our branded stuff. We keep them separate and we make sure that there is identity between both. And one other thing I wanted to touch on as well is the fact that you mentioned something that I think is crucially important that maybe people forget is just because someone's a TV presenter or a radio presenter does not mean they can also be a podcast presenter. There is a particular character that's needed, and sometimes the best people are actually the people that have had no involvement in media before, or just real big fans of whatever they're talking about. And actually, that's one thing I wanted to touch on. Why do you think it is that companion podcasts for TV shows and films and things like that are so loved by the communities when it's literally people talking about the same show that they've just watched? Why do you think companion podcasts work so well?
I think it's just it's purely the relatability thing of, like, when you consume something on the TV or you're at a concert or whatever it is, and you're like, you have reckons about it, and then you kind of stumble across something that is other people who have reckons about the same thing. And you might listen to it and it might not fly with you, and that's fine. But if it does fly with you and they do entertain you and you are finding yourself either going, no, I disagree, or absolutely 100%, then that kind of draws you in. Now, if these hosts or host have this kind of way of, making it kind of entertaining as well, and you get to know them, there becomes this kind of parasocial relationship with them, it can be, and we see it time and time again, what starts out as like, oh, I was obsessed with this TV show, and so I wanted to hear someone unpack it. starts to become, I love those hosts. I could hear them talk about anything. Like they can talk about their lives, and then they become part of what is so magical about listening to this thing. And that's how you build that relationship. Now, I just don't think that exists in any other format. No one's sitting there going, wow, Simon Dello, I'm so curious to know what happened after he got his car fixed last week. But you might say that about your favorite podcast host, even though ostensibly they're doing a podcast, covering a reality TV show. But you get a little window into their lives. You've kind of created this relationship with them. It's very intimate in your ears. It's something you've chosen to listen to. It's not just in the background. So it does present such a unique opportunity to connect with the audience. And it's not just companion podcasts to TV and movies and books and so on. It's like sports, like literally any niche interest you can think of, there is a podcast that will be talking about it.
I'm very much like a boomer mum in the sense where my mum was obsessed with true crime, and my thing is listening to too many true crime podcasts that my partner probably thinks that I'm a sadist in some ways of listening to that stuff all the time. But there's one particular one I listen to.
It does desensitize you in a weird way, though, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. It makes me sometimes after listening to an episode, I'm like, what am I doing? It's weird the parasocial relationship I have with and he's a very big podcaster in New Zealand, Ryan Wolf, who does the Guilt podcast, and it's odd because you do feel after listening to these people maybe going through these different various social situations, whatever, that you do have this personal relationship, and then I kind of have to take a step back and be like, oh yeah, this guy has no idea who I am. I'm just a random person messaging him on Instagram saying I love his episode. But it's crazy the connection.
Does he message you back?
Funnily enough, he did message me back.
Well, there you go. So you're not just a random person. You're a guy he's messaged. So, we found with The Real Pod, we had this very active community on Facebook. The Real Pod hasn't been going for years. The group is still going. They still do Secret Santa with each other. They meet up. There have been relationships formed out of this group. I cannot stress enough how much, as a listener, if you've got a podcast host doing their job properly, you are not just some random to them. Like, you are their community. So, to me, the real heroes of The Real Pod were definitely not me, Alex, and Duncan. It was all the people who listen and engage with us and continue to engage with each other. It's like the most wholesome thing you could possibly think of, and it all came out of us like recapping reality TV shows.
I think it kind of goes back to another thing that I remember seeing an interview with, that's a Stranger Side, but the cast of Stranger Things, and they were talking about the fact, and this is probably going to come out much later after it's been released, but the fact that people are planning their Christmas and New Year's around the release of a TV show. Does it kind of feel weird that people fit in, or they think about the fact that your podcast is coming out on a certain day and they need to be aware of when the release is coming? Did that ever cross your mind that someone probably plans their week around when your release is coming out?
I don't know that people were quite that passionate about it. They were pretty passionate, though. I mean, I think, I just think of myself and the way that I operate. There have certainly been times when I've been so hooked on a podcast that I've been like, cannot wait for it to drop. Like, what time is that out? Checking my feed or really noticing if something didn't come out when I was expecting it to. So I guess it's not that crazy to think that people might have been doing that a little bit with our podcast too. But it was the stories that we'd hear like, we fall asleep. I listen to it. Me and my partner listen to it while we're falling asleep and stuff like that. And we're like, wow, we are literally in bed with you guys. Like, it's quite humbling to think that we were, for, a good number of people, like an important part of their day or their week. And we, the main thing for me was like, it sounds a bit cliche. It sounds like something you'd find at a middle-aged woman's gift shop, but like bringing joy, live, laugh, love. We were bringing some lols, basically. And my favorite thing to think about was someone like bursting out laughing on the train. Like, they're listening to our podcast, just quietly minding their own business. We say something, it makes them laugh, and everyone on the train is like, are they okay?
I know what you mean, because I think it's the same thing, which originally when I heard the concept of comedy podcasts, I was like, that's fucking ridiculous. I can't listen to podcasts and think it's funny. And then I obviously had that moment where I was smiling like a fucking idiot while I was like walking down the street, and I was like, someone either thinks I'm mentally deranged or like that I'm just like wasted off my tits for whatever reason. So yeah, I now finally understand that love and that idea of like, you just want to make someone laugh. Because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
great. It's a
it is.
beautiful thing.
It
And
is.
Jane, I think the interesting thing that we found as well is that it's almost like you went into this business side of things with the spin-off when you were developing the podcast network, and then you made an even bigger shift because then you started working with the team at APDA. Now, I need to ask, what made you shift into there? Because it seems, once again, it seems like a completely foreign
You've been
thing to
on
be
my
moving.
LinkedIn, haven't you?
Oh,
I'll
maybe.
tell.
Yeah,
I'll
a
tell
little bit
you.
of that.
I'll tell you what made the shift. Okay. So again, it's probably not as exciting as you think. Number one, I was made redundant, so I was out of work. I was made redundant from the spin-off in 2024, at the end of 2024. And that was heartbreaking. Like, as you can imagine, I had a lot of friends working there. I had, you know, like it sounds really wanky to say it, but I guess it's kind of fact. Like, I had been pretty instrumental in building out their podcast network and its commercial viability. I'd been a host on the network. I had like the most amazing working relationship with my colleagues, and particularly, my offsider in podcast, Tiahe Butler, who is alongside Alex Casey, the most incredible human ever. And it was really the spinoff. If anyone who's worked there will tell you, it is like it is very much like a family. So losing my job there hit really hard. And as someone with mental health issues in my history, that was a dark, really, really dark time. And at some point, I needed to make some money because I'd also just bought a house. So there was a mortgage to be paid. So my sister is very talented, and she has a dance syllabus company called the Australasia Pacific Dance Association. And she is kind of a one-man band. It's like it's got dance. Her syllabus is out in like different countries around the world. She was kind of running it herself as well as running her own dance studio, and she was just very overwhelmed. And she was like, "Can you help me?" And I was like, "Yes, I need some work, and I love what you're doing, and I'm super proud of everything you're doing." And I had learnt quite a bit kind of about, like, I think there's the advantage of working at the spin-off. As a small business, you can't help but be involved in some ways in how the business operates at various levels. And I was in a senior leadership position there for a wee bit. So, I was in the inner workings of budgets and that kind of thing, working really closely with the commercial team and looking at our strategic direction and that sort of thing. So I kind of came in and did a little bit of sweep of everything that she had going on with her business, and we were kind of setting a few things up there. And so that was just freelancing with her, and also working for this incredible green tech company called Nilo, who it might sound a bit dry. They make adhesive for engineered wood products, but they make it from recycled plastic, and it's kind of revolutionary. It's a like $268 billion industry worldwide. IKEA are one of their investors, and so I went and did some comms work for them, set up their comms strategy, and looked after their visual brand redesign and website relaunch and stuff. So that was a part-time gig as well. So those things were really fun in a different way. Like, definitely added some new skill sets to my toolkit, and really nice people. It's actually really nice to get away from media for a bit. It was really nice to just kind of be like, oh, like there's media is the landscape's been so grim. People losing jobs left, right, and center. There's no money in it. No one's advertising. So it was really cool to go and work for two companies who are like in growth mode, who are actually growing and have like amazing potential to be hugely successful. So that was a real shift.
Because that was the thing loved, because as soon as I saw you jumping into kind of the corporate side, the growth side of things, I was like, okay, Jane has literally gone into these roles to create a whole new strategy or grew a completely new area within these companies. And it was obvious from kind of looking at like how you moved into that. And I love that, because I think this is the kind of misconception that some people have when they say, oh, you got a communications degree. Oh, so you got a degree to talk shit. And it's like, no, there is so much more to it. And once you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, those are the kind of roles, and those are the places that we learn how to be able to deal in like a business sense and a corporate sense, but maybe we just don't realize it. We think at the time we're just, I don't know, mic jockeys, and we don't really do much else, but there is just so much more to it, and there's a lot more elements to it. And I think it's cool that you kind of had that light bulb moment yourself where you're like, oh shit, I can work in corporate as well. I don't always have to work in media. Now my horizons are a lot wider. Like,
Jamie, I actually went for a job, like a brand job, at one of the big law firms, which I didn't get. And I'm so glad I didn't get, because yes, I think I like startup territory, sure, where it's still like quite energetic and kind of like everyone's involved in every aspect. But like, I'm kind of glad I didn't get that full corporate job, because I actually don't think I could do it.
what, you
Maybe I
can
could.
write
I
the
don't
monthly
know.
legal newsletter for all the barristers?
Like,
Like,
I
no.
could do it. I definitely could do it, but I don't think that I would have really enjoyed it. And as we move into my new role, which is at the Herald as the head of podcasts, so lucky to get that role, because again, there's just not that many. There's just not that many. There's not that many jobs in media, but there's definitely, when you get down to like something as niche as podcasting, there's not that many opportunities at a certain level in this country. So I was very fortunate that the previous head of podcasts, Ethan Sills at the Herald, he decided that he was going to up off overseas. And that worked out really nicely for me. So I'm very grateful that he did that, because, I'm in a really different environment. Couldn't be more different from the spin-off in many, many ways, but really invigorating to be in a vibrant newsroom, where news is breaking constantly. We're very much in the newsroom. We're very much part of it all. And I have a really, a small but mighty little team. And I've come to realize that I do just really love working. And I really love working with good people, and I love working with people who know how to have a laugh, and I love audio. Like, what a sad old lady I am that I just love working with my mates making audio.
Is it kind of weird to think about? Because at different points, I think a lot of people have always said like audio or radio is like a dying medium. People aren't going to listen to it and things like that. Is it kind of funny now to look back and be like, literally podcasting has become one of the most dominant media forms now, exceeding traditional video, among other things. Is it kind of strange to think about it that like this all kind of started from you being a radio host in the early 2000s to where you are now? Could you ever have imagined the fact that you would have gone into all these different forms of media, but essentially you've still managed to stay in audio itself?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think I ever had that clarity of thought to be able to look ahead. I've never had a plan for my career. In fact, I probably would never even used the word career before I joined LinkedIn. Like, I just, I had jobs. And I just didn't think about it like that. So there was never a plan. I always thought the Holy Grail was like reading the news, but that's obviously that's not something I'm going to be doing anytime soon. I don't think I would enjoy it. I think it's just like that's the Holy Grail job, right? But I think ultimately, I like being able to say what I want to say, not just reading from a script. That sounds really full of myself. I trust me, I don't think I've got anything I've got to say is of any value. It's just that I think that I would struggle to feel authentically me if I was just, sitting there reading an auto cue all the time. And also, I love being able to be part of other parts of whatever it is I'm working in. So, like I still actively try to keep my skills up with editing and that sort of thing. I'm dabbling around with come up with some of the TV, the video editing side of stuff. I love getting in Canva and designing things, even though they probably look terrible. There's just all these little bits I think that keep your work interesting. that also mean that you're never kind of sitting still for too long. And these are all skills that can come in handy. I know I couldn't have predicted the weird ways in which my career has gone. And I'm glad that I couldn't have predicted that, because it probably would have felt a lot of pressure that I had to be the very best at like PR, or the very best at communications, or the very best at podcasting. And actually all of these little diversions along the way have just taught me different things, have connected me with different people, that have all, led to all the experiences that I've had. So it's been, I don't know. As I sit here and think about it, and I do a lot of thinking out loud, as you can probably tell, I still kind of just think like I just got lucky and had a bunch of good jobs, Like, I think that kind of just is the way it is. And I feel very, very fortunate for that. And I struggle to think of myself as any sort of success or anything, because I'm just kind of like, well, I just did the thing I like doing. And if that's success, then yes, I guess I've been successful in that way.
And the thing that I kind of thought about as well is, because you've shifted from music to entertainment, what was the kind of biggest learning curve for you shifting to essentially what is the newsroom into the headlines, into talking about what can be some very incredibly serious topics? What were some of the biggest things that you had to kind of learn and pick up on the way? And also, on the other end of the scale, what are some of the things that you took from your previous roles that were entertainment podcasts that you've kind of inserted into what is the New Zealand Herald style of podcasting? Is there elements of kind of both?
Well, obviously I can't give away my strategy.
Of course not.
Okay, we're moving into a whole new year, a whole new strategy. But I've only been at the Herald for, not very long, just a few months. So a lot of it has been just learning the way that the enormous structure that is NZME works, figuring out where the stairways go, like that, that took a week in itself. There's so many meeting rooms. They've all got strange
really
names.
are.
There really are so many to try and find. So, it's a lot of the shift has really just been coming from a SME, a small medium business, into like a really big organization, and all the moving parts that are involved there, and where do I fit in, and what can I do and what can't I do. So there's been a lot of just kind of settling time, getting to know the various hosts and products that are already on the slate, straight in on kind of like pitching to New Zealand on air and that sort of thing too. So there's elements of my previous work that come through, obviously, in terms of just very much the audio side and the kind of dealing with funding applications and that kind of thing. But plugging into the newsroom is definitely something that's new for me. And I fucking love it. I'm way more of a news head than I thought I was. Everyone laughs at me because I get so excited about breaking news, and they're all so used to it. So over it. Well, not over it necessarily, but you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, a fire? Where? And they're like, honestly, this is like the fifth one this week. One of the, editors came racing in one day and was like, snake on a plane. I was like, this is amazing. Down tool. There's a snake on a plane. And when I was just like diving around everyone's computers to see if I could get a look at this snake that had been in someone's luggage. So I can kind of find a way to make things entertaining, but we have had to deal with some really full-on stories this year. The Tom Phillips story, that was huge, and that happened not long after I started, and that was the day I was like, okay, we're going to do a location episode. We're going down to Pio, and we did. So this was for our daily news podcast, The Front Page, and that was really sobering. It was a really intense day, and a really good experience for me and the team early on to kind of like just kick into gear and just do something. They hadn't done it before. I think they were kind of looking at me like, what? We don't do location episodes. I'm like, why not?
We do now.
Let's just, I mean, I spoke to my manager and was like, is this okay if we do this? And she's in New Zealand. She was like, yeah, of course, it's fine. Like, as long as you're not chalking up a whole load of, overnight stays on the company credit card, then you're fine. So we just went down there and back in a day. We went to Pio where the alleged break-in happened. We was scouting around trying to talk to some locals. Everyone was very guarded, didn't want to talk to us. And then we ended up speaking to the mayor of the region, and that episode did really, really well. And it was just a very strange, a really strange year. But it was great to be able to be so responsive to something immediately and have the resources to be able to do that. So I'm adding news as one of my interests to my CV because I do. I love it. I love it. And there's so much to learn about kind of all the, what you can and can't say legally. And, there's all these different parameters around things, different style guides. So it's where I go, every job I do, there's always things to learn. And I think that when you stop learning is probably a good time to retire. And
a cool thing that I love is the fact that I feel like, Jane, you now have the resources to kind of realize a lot more projects than compared to maybe the tighter budgets that you had previously with Spin-Off. And for example, I really want to touch on the Fall of House de Vol, which I can imagine for a smaller production house that would have been incredibly challenging to do, but with the kind of production value that you have there, you have the resources to do it. What does it feel like to have that sort of freedom to be able to realize projects that you're like, geez, I don't think I could have done this without this sort of backing?
I think this is the misconceptions, because actually that thing has been made on the smell of an oily rag. What we have had access to, it's a passion project, right? Of Maria Slade's, she's been covering the de Val saga for years and years. I inherited this project, so it had started when I began, and it wasn't in production, but kind of the prop was out there. And we were very lucky to receive some funding from the Brian Gaynor Journalism Initiative, which is essentially about kind of providing money to get these business stories out here that make a difference. And Money Hub came on board as well with a little bit of a contribution. So there was some funding there, nowhere near as much as you would really need to make a production of this level, but it was something that people just wanted to do. So, Maria's editor allowed her time to work on it. We did get a freelance producer, Hamish Williams, involved. So he's done some other, great podcasts. He did Tangawai for the Herald before as well. So he's, and he's well experienced. He's done podcasts for other platforms also. And then I kind of have just been really there from an executive producer point of view alongside Duncan Bridgman, and just feeding back a lot into scripts, because Maria's never done a podcast before. She's done a lot of writing before, but she hasn't written for podcasts. So we were just doing a lot of help with, scripting and just empowering her to do that. But she's been doing the bulk of the work, and then we've had a sound designer putting it all together. But this is not like a hugely resourced project at all. Really, the bulk of what has made this project work is just Maria's hard work and all the existing knowledge that she already has around this, and all the time that she's put into finding the clips and scripting it and putting it together. So actually, no, I couldn't just kind of walk in there and go, hey, I think we should do a series on this scandal, because we actually don't have the resources to just pivot like that ordinarily. Just like every other media company, NZME has, and the Herald has had to lay off staff, earlier on in 2025, and that was a really difficult time for that newsroom. So there's, yes, there are, we've got like in-house legal. That's a great resource. There's certainly resources that we have, but it doesn't mean that I can just roll in and make whatever I like. There has to be a business case for it, whether that's like an amazing audience rationale. That means we will be able to make some money via advertising, and just huge editorial splash kind of thing, or like a purely commercial rationale where we can get sponsors on board who can help just keep the lights on. So it's exactly the same challenges, just at a slightly bigger scale.
It moves actually quite nicely into my next question, which is, we were talking off air when we first started about the fact that it's interesting to see how much the podcasting industry has grown in New Zealand. And one thing that I'd be interested to get your perspective on, Jane, is the fact, do you still feel like advertisers and sponsors are scared of the idea of podcasts? And do you think they're still hesitant to invest in new media, even though it's blatantly obvious that podcasts are some of the most well-followed media in this current time? But do you still think it's a hard sell saying to advertisers, no, trust me, if you have people that have this in their ears, they're going to end up converting and potentially becoming a customer or a sale? Or do you think, no, everyone's got behind the horse, it's just a slow build in New Zealand?
It is a slow build, and there are definitely more people behind the horse. I don't work in sales, so I can only go from what the sales teams tell us, which is that, yes, it can be difficult. It can be difficult to sell in podcasts. Now, we have, the one thing we do have that's great at NZME is the iHeart ecosystem. So we have kind of like, there's the Herald Pod Network, but there's also all these other brands. You've got all the radio brands and you've got the iHeart brand. And so across all of these different brands, we've got like hundreds of podcasts, right? And so we can, when we sell inventory, we can be selling it across a whole bunch of different products, which, that business model works really, really well for us. So it does mean that we do have advertisers coming to us who can get like a really good breadth of content. And that does make it extremely hard for the independents to be able to get any traction in that area when there's people like us kind of going around with so much, it's just so much to offer. And I feel for the independents, because really the only meaningful way you can make decent coin is to align yourself with a brand, and that's hard work. That's hard work. One of the big difficulties I have found consistently is getting brands to understand that those who make the product know their audience and know how to reach them, and ultimately know how to sell the thing the brand's trying to sell. So I've consistently worked with brands who have come in and gone, you guys are the experts, you do your thing, and we come up with a creative plan and they go, great, and then we kind of start getting into it. The more we get into the process, they start going, oh, I'm not sure that we're showing up enough in this. And can we make the tile our brand colors? And can we make our logo bigger? And can the host be wearing our t-shirt? And then you start to get into this thing where it's like, no one's going to want to listen to this because it is too branded, and they are not stupid. And actually, the more you put yourself in, the less the value of the alignment becomes. And so obviously it makes no sense for a brand not to be involved in any way. But you've just got to be smart about the integration. And actually, that's where people like yourself, Jamie, and I have that experience of, we've kind of made our mistakes. We know what works and what doesn't. Ultimately, we know what the audience thinks and how they consume products, and what will endear them to a brand. And usually that is the association with just some great content, and clever host. There's still not a lot of host reads in New Zealand. There's still a lot of just like straight up radio ads being played on podcasts, which I'm sure is, an economy of scale thing in terms of production, but it's not as effective as host reads. There's still a lot more education to be done. The advertising industry and podcasts internationally is huge. It's a huge moneymaker. It's extremely effective. There's inarguable evidence that podcasting is an excellent way to reach audiences and an excellent way to target audiences. I think we are still behind here in Aotearoa. I think part of the problem is we are also, any New Zealand podcast is also competing against the international, all the international products as well. So it can be hard to cut through. So it is risky. It is risky for brands to jump on board with something and not know, especially something that's not established, and not know whether or not it's going to fly and get this big audience. So there's kind of, I don't know, it's probably I wouldn't say high risk, but I think it's a high reward medium to advertise in. And I think you just have to look at the evidence of what goes on overseas and just kind of back it as an exciting format that has really amazing cut through to the audience, and just work with people who know how to talk to those audiences. That would be my number one thing for advertisers and brands, is to give it a go. Start out small, just play some spots to begin with, maybe to book some host reads, and then kind of just talk to the various producers and see kind of what they can build out for your brand, because the opportunities to reach audiences are massive.
being a podcast expert, Jane, it would be remiss of me not to ask this as sort of the final
Oh my God,
question.
don't ask me what I'm listening to.
No, I'm not. No, that was actually not going to be the one I was going to ask you, because I know it's going to be a reality TV show podcast, probably The Bachelor.
No, what I'm listening to mostly is the podcast we make because I'm constantly having to ear check them.
There we go. Okay.
And there's so many of them.
Surprisingly, that wasn't going to be my last question, but now I feel like it has to be. The thing I wanted to ask you, because you touched on something saying it's harder and harder for indie podcasters to get recognized, especially with sponsors and advertisers. But for someone that has been in the podcast space for so long, and maybe this is a relevant thing for me, what would you recommend to any podcaster, especially in the indie space in New Zealand? What should they be doing in order to get recognized? And it's kind of a little bit related to what we talked about off air, about the concept of you need to launch hard, you need to launch fast, and you need to have a plan. But what is your recommendation for someone that is coming in fresh to podcasting in 2025?
Yeah, I think the launch hard thing applies to a certain kind of, if you've got a certain resource, right? So if you have the time and you have the context to be able to do a press release and kind of build up a little bit of hype around something, then absolutely you should do that. You should pull every lever that you can. The biggest impact you are going to make is on launch, particularly if you're doing something that's like a limited series. Most indie podcasters are probably talking about something that they love, that they're passionate about, and they might be doing that as an ongoing series. So I think the thing here is really about patience and a plan. I still maintain you need a plan. You need to look realistically at how long you're willing to do this for, even if the only people listening are you and your neighbor and your mum. Like, how long are you willing to just slowly build your audience? Because it takes time. You think of all the many, many podcasts that are out there that are on offer. It's like, how on earth do you cut through? So you need to think about your release cadence. I'm going to release weekly. I'm going to release fortnightly. Like, what is realistic? What is realistic that you can continue to do? Because the most important thing, I think, is just to keep going. So many podcasts go for 2 months, 3 months, and then they just die. So how long can you consistently actually do this for? If it's good fun, it's much easier, right? So try and make it, as easy for yourself as possible. Try not to get bogged down with scripting and that kind of thing, because that's going to be the stuff that becomes like a hard slog. If it's more like you can just like get on the mic and talk about the thing that you know and love so much that it's just easy just to wax on about it. Is that a term? I don't think so. Wax lyrical about it. Then that's going to be a lot more appealing and easier to do and not feel like work week after week after week after week. But there are lots of little things you can do. Obviously, you take advantage of social media. You plug into any networks. If you're a gamer and you're talking about gaming, you get onto your Discord servers. You get onto Twitch. You talk about this thing that you're doing. You do, look at other podcasts in that space. See if you can do some cross promo with them. See if you can get other hosts to appear on your podcast and vice versa. Any kind of word of mouth stuff. Take advantage of any free kind of advertising that you can get. And ultimately, if your product's really good and you are able to get it in front of the right audience, then it will work, because word of mouth is still, the number one thing that drives a podcast success, and is the number one way, particularly independent producers are going to be able to make any cut through, is through that, just like that really great product that gets in front of the right people. You only need one massive influencer to be like, listening to this thing, it's so good, you guys should check it out. So, just take advantage of your entire contact list.
I said that was the last question. That's a lie. This is the final question, and I don't think you're going to be able to say a lot. So let's see how we go. But Jane, in terms of passion projects or projects that you've got in the background that you can't wait to either try and release, or you would love to at least get some backing behind to make it happen, is there a podcast that has not been realized yet that you would like to release, or there's a subject matter that you feel hasn't been touched on that you would love to make something?
I actually don't really feel like there is anything in this world that there is not a podcast for. Look, if you're talking about work stuff, no, I can't talk about that. I can't talk about what's missing on the Herald slate that you might see in 2026. But that's work, right? And I love making making podcasts, and there are plenty of podcasts that I would like to make that just wouldn't fit the Herald audience. So, I love entertainment stuff. I love just my dream podcast, honestly, is just me and Alex Casey catching up. Because Alex and I just have this, I don't know, we have this thing when the mics go on, and it seems to be something that people enjoy, and we enjoy it so much. So it would just feel like, it would just feel very natural, and just all those things that I just talked about. Like if you're wanting to make a podcast and make it easy for yourself and something you want to, we always looked forward to doing the Real Pod together. I'd add Duncan in the mix, but he's just way too busy, and that was part of the reason that we stopped doing it. So I'm like, take the easy road, just target Alex. She just has, I don't know, she's just like, I just love hearing her anecdotes. And so if I could make a podcast, that's what it would be. It's a little tricky. We're at competing grades at the moment, but maybe one day.
If you like the podcast, I'd love for you to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform and let me know your thoughts on the show. Don't forget, you can reach out to me via Instagram at BeyondBroadcastPod or via email at beyondbroadcastpod@gmail.com. Until next time, take it easy.